Prison Food in Different Countries. The Meal Behind Bars. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The world divides its prisons by geography, language, and law. But every one of them speaks the same silent language: the clatter of trays, the smell of boiled starch, the wait for food that's never quite enough. To the outside world, prison meals are a curiosity. To those inside, they're the rhythm of existence, the one routine that cannot be taken, no matter the crime. From the Supermax compounds of the United States, to the regimented halls of Japan, to Russia's frozen penal colonies, and the overcrowded cells of Latin America, what's on the plate tells a story of justice, poverty, and power. Because behind bars, food is never just food. The United States, efficiency over flavor. In America's correctional system, food is mathematic. Calories are counted, menus standardized, and nutrition measured by budget instead of appetite. According to Bureau of Prisons records, the average inmate meal costs between $1 and $1.25. At ADX Florence, the Supermax of Supermaxes, meals are designed for containment, soft foods served on trays that fit through door slots. Breakfast, almuefin, pão de eggs, coffee. Lunch, a sandwich with bologna or peanut butter. Dinner, beans, rice, or something called soy patty atre B. The taste? Former inmates describe it in one word: gray. A 2021 report from the Marshall Project quoted a prisoner saying, "You don't eat for flavor. You eat for control." In Louisiana's Angola prison, known as the Farm, meals have changed little since its days as a slave plantation. Inmates still work in the fields that grow their food. Rice, beans, cabbage, cheap, filling, endless. When budgets tighten, food quality falls first. Arizona's state audit once revealed prisons feeding inmates on less than 90 cents per meal. Spoiled meat and moldy bread led to riots in the early 2010s, yet contracts with private food vendors like Trinity Services Group continued. And in solitary confinement, food becomes punishment itself. Some U.S. states still use Nutriloaf, a dense, flavorless block made from blended vegetables, flour, and oil. Courts have debated whether it's cruel and unusual, but the message is clear. You can't control much in prison, but you can control hunger, or deny it. Russia, the cold kitchen. If American prison food is industrial, Russian prison food is elemental, survival reduced to its most basic form. At Penal Colony No. 2 in Pokrov, where opposition figures have been held, breakfast is kasha, a watery porridge. Lunch, according to BBC Russia, is cabbage soup with floating potato skins. Dinner, bread and weak tea. The Russian Federal Penitentiary Service claims prisoners receive 2,500 calories per day, but former inmates tell another story: barely 1,500 in reality, and only if corruption doesn't intercept the supplies first. Human rights group Memorial documented cases of guards reselling food shipments to local markets, leaving inmates to survive on half rations. Those assigned to kitchen duty wield quiet power. A spoonful of sugar can buy a cigarette, an extra slice of bread can buy protection. Food decides who lives easy and who starves, one ex-prisoner told Novaya Gazeta. In the freezing barracks of Siberia, hot soup is currency and control. Refusing to eat is treated not as protest but as defiance against the state. Force feeding is legal and common, administered with plastic tubing and threat. It's not nourishment, it's discipline. Still, amid scarcity, prisoners create small moments of humanity. Some save bread crusts for birthdays, others trade cabbage leaves to make prison salad. A former cook wrote in his memoir, "It wasn't food. It was resistance shaped like soup." Japan. Discipline served daily in Japan's prisons. Meals are exact, predictable, and served with ritual precision. According to the Japanese Ministry of Justice, Every inmate receives a carefully calculated diet, 1,800 to 2,100 calories per day, varying by weight and work assignment. Breakfast: rice, miso soup, and pickled vegetables. Lunch: grilled fish or tofu, rice, and boiled greens. Dinner: soup and vegetables, sometimes a small piece of chicken or egg. Nothing is wasted, and nothing is seasoned beyond salt. At Fuchu Prison, Tokyo's largest, eating is silent. Inmates sit upright in rows. No one speaks, no one moves until everyone is served. A former inmate told Asahi Shimbun, eating felt like military training. Chew 15 times, swallow, place chopsticks down. Precision, not pleasure. The Japanese penal philosophy sees food as moral education, teaching patience, gratitude, and humility. But psychologists call it emotional starvation. Criminologist David T. Johnson wrote that meals sustain the body but deny the self. For all its austerity, Japan's prison system has among the lowest reoffending rates in the world. To some, the order works. To others, it simply hides the hunger for individuality. Latin America, hunger and hierarchy. In Brazil, El Salvador, and Venezuela, food is chaos. In the favelas of Rio, overcrowded jails feed 10 men from one pot. In El Salvador's Mariona prison, inmates told Reuters that meals consisted of rice, beans, and despair. When gangs control the inside, food becomes hierarchy. Those in power eat first. Those without alliances eat last, if at all. Human Rights Watch documented instances in Venezuela's Tocaron prison where guards sold food rations to inmates at inflated prices, while the poorest survived on crumbs or rainwater. In El Salvador's Secote mega prison, government footage released in 2023 showed prisoners kneeling in lines, heads down, eating under armed supervision. The state described it as discipline. Critics called it collective humiliation. Here, food is fear. It's served not to nourish but to remind. A Salvadoran pastor working with released inmates told BBC Mundo, "They don't fear hunger. They fear being watched while they eat." Europe, between reform and reality. Europe's prisons reflect its politics, half reform, half restraint. In Norway's Halden prison, inmates cook their own meals. They shop at a small grocery inside, choose ingredients, and share tables. The state calls it rehabilitation. The inmates call it a taste of freedom. A guard told The Guardian, "If they can handle a knife in a kitchen, they can handle life outside." Contrast that with Poland, where state audits in 2022 found prisons serving watery soups and frozen bread, with some facilities still relying on coal stove. Inmates on special diets, medical, religious, or cultural, wait months for approval. And in France's Fleury-Mérogis prison, overcrowding means meals arrive cold and late. Yet in the same country, reform programs allow select prisoners to work in culinary training kitchens, preparing food for staff. A journalist visiting one wrote, "It smelled like garlic and normal life." Europe's systems show a divide. Some rebuild humanity through food, others reinforce order through deprivation. The tray becomes a mirror, reflecting whether justice means punishment or preparation. The universal rule. Across all borders and philosophies, food inside prisons carries the same message. This is what society believes you deserve. In some places, that means enough to survive. In others, it means learning that even taste can be a privilege. A man released from AU's federal prison once said in an interview, "They fed me 3 times a day for 10 years, but I never once felt full." And in that single sentence lies the truth behind every prison meal. You can lock a man away, but as long as he eats what you decide, his hunger will never truly belong to him. Food as power. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real event. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. Food is the only thing in prison that everyone touches. Every inmate, from the lifer to the first-timer, shares that one routine: a tray slid across steel, a smell that's never quite appetizing, a portion that reminds them they no longer control anything, not even hunger. But in that sameness, a strange economy emerges. When freedom is gone, food becomes currency. A cup of instant noodles can be worth a pack of cigarettes. A slice of bread can buy protection. And the man who controls the kitchen controls the prison. The Ramen Wars, United States. By the mid-2010s, America's prisons had quietly replaced cash with calories. Sociologist Michael Gibson Light called it the ramen economy. In interviews across multiple U.S. correctional systems, he discovered what guards already knew: food had become money. When states began privatizing food services and cutting costs, meals got smaller and worse. According to the Marshall Project, portion sizes dropped by as much as 20%, forcing inmates to find other sources of sustenance. Commissaries sold instant noodles, cheap, filling, and portable. They became the new dollar. At San Quentin, a single pack of ramen bought a favor. At Rikers Island, 2 packs bought protection. At Angola Prison, 5 could buy you a haircut or a handmade tattoo. In the yard, trades looked like handshakes. In cells, they looked like survival. Inmates mixed noodles with canned tuna and hot sauce, creating spreads, improvised meals that built alliances. If you shared a spread, you shared loyalty. But with every economy comes exploitation. Inmates with outside support, those whose families sent money, became storemen. They lent out ramen, coffee, or honey buns at interest, creating debt that could never be repaid. When debts piled up, violence followed. A 2018 Los Angeles Times report on California's prisons described food debt fights that ended with men hospitalized over a missing pack of soup. In prison, hunger is leverage. The commissary isn't just a store, it's a trap. A former inmate summed it up: you can starve or you can owe. Either way, somebody owns you. The Kitchen Kings. Russia. In Russia's penal colonies, the economy revolves around bread. Not money, not contraband, but loaves. A few extra slices can determine who sleeps near the heater and who sleeps by the door. Inside IK-14, a labor colony in Mordovia, the kitchen is sacred ground. Guards trust only the oldest inmates to run it, and those men become gods of the gray soup line. According to Meduza and BBC Russia, cooks decide who gets the thicker portion, who gets seconds, and who goes hungry. An inmate interviewed after release described it this way: in the colony, the man with the ladle is the man with life. Corruption seeps into the pot. Food shipments are siphoned. Ingredients disappear before they reach the kitchen. What remains is stretched thin with water. Bread that should feed 100 feeds 150. The difference lines someone's pocket. When scarcity becomes constant, favors grow expensive. A guard's cigarette pack can buy meat. A prisoner's silence can buy sugar. Those who complain are reassigned to the punishment cells, cold, concrete boxes where even water is rationed. And still, men find dignity in small acts of defiance. They toast crusts over smuggled lighters, make tea from pine needles, or hide butter in soap tins. Each trick a reminder that the state can ration calories, but not creativity. The forbidden market. Japan. In Japan's prison system, there is no black market for food, at least, not officially. Every grain of rice is recorded, every utensil counted, every dish logged. Sharing or trading food violates Article 30 of the Prison Act and can result in solitary confinement. The goal is moral correction through uniformity. But even here, hunger finds a way to speak. According to interviews compiled by Asahi Shimbun, inmates secretly slip each other pickled radish or save an extra piece of tofu for a sick cellmate. It's a small risk, but in a place where silence is policy, kindness is rebellion. There are no commissaries and no money inside. Meals arrive with military precision, same portions, same time, every day. The system's efficiency is almost machine-like, but it leaves no room for humanity. A former inmate wrote in a memoir published under a pseudonym, "In prison, we all ate the same food. That was justice. But also punishment, to taste nothing that was yours." South America, food and fear across Brazil, El Salvador, and Honduras. Food isn't economy or order, it's control through chaos. In overcrowded jails where cells built for 50 hold hundreds, the kitchen becomes battleground and bargaining table. The gangs that rule the blocks decide who eats first. Sometimes the guards eat before the inmates, sometimes they eat from the same pot. At Brazil's Carandiru Penitentiary before its closure, meals were boiled beans and cassava cooked over improvised burners made from scrap metal. Inmates paid protection fees for an extra portion. Those without money ate from the dregs of the pot, a meal the locals called sopa de miseria, the soup of misery. In El Salvador's Mariona prison, according to Reuters, men eat kneeling, watched by soldiers. The state calls it discipline, critics call it degradation. If you disobey, your food is cut for a day. 2 days of hunger, and you'll beg to comply. Food here is not a right, it's obedience measured in rice. Europe, between two philosophies. In Scandinavia, food symbolizes rehabilitation. In Eastern Europe, it symbolizes endurance. At Norway's Halden prison, inmates buy groceries with state stipends and cook together in shared kitchens. Meals look like home: fresh vegetables, bread, even salmon. The idea, according to Norway's correctional service, is simple: treat people like humans, and they will behave like humans. But in Romania, Poland, and parts of the Balkans, rations remain thin and repetitive. Soup, potatoes, bread, morning and night. European Committee for the Prevention of Torture reports describe deficient caloric intake and meals unfit for medical needs. One Romanian inmate interviewed by Deutsche Welle said, "We're not asking for steak. We just want the food not to smell of rust." The same continent holds both worlds: the kitchen of empathy and the kitchen of austerity. The invisible economy. Wherever prisons exist, they invent their own marketplaces. In the U.S., the commissary. In Russia, the kitchen line. In Latin America, the gang's pot. Each system transforms hunger into hierarchy. It's never written in law, but every prisoner learns it within days. He who controls food controls time, safety, and silence. Inmates remember who served them a full spoon and who didn't. They build alliances with cooks, trade favors for bread, or risk punishment to smuggle sugar. In the absence of money, taste becomes power. And beyond power lies something even deeper: identity. In every prison studied, meals reinforce the same psychological divide between them and us. The state feeds, the prisoner eats, and in that exchange, humanity thins just as the soup does. The taste of survival. For some, prison food is just fuel. For others, it becomes the only part of the day that feels alive. Inmates turn leftovers into art: spreads, sandwiches, soups made with contraband seasoning, and shared stories. They eat fast, laugh quietly, and for a few minutes forget where they are. A former Texas inmate described it perfectly: "We didn't have salt or freedom, but when you cook something together, it tastes like both." It's those fleeting meals, not the institutional trays, that keep people human inside systems built to erase them. Hunger as rebellion. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real event. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The last thing a prison fears isn't a weapon, or even an escape. It's the tray that comes back untouched. When a prisoner stops eating, the system loses its language of control. Schedules, punishments, and privileges mean nothing to a man who has chosen to starve. In that silence, the entire machine begins to shake. The spark of refusal. It starts quietly. One inmate pushes away his food and says nothing. A guard shrugs. He's seen protests before. But by the next morning, 5 more trays remain untouched. By the end of the week, the dining hall hums with defiance. Inside walls built for order, hunger is chaos. Every skipped meal is a sentence of self-ownership. Every growling stomach whispers the same forbidden word, enough. Pelican Bay, 2013. The strike that echoed across America in July 2013, California woke up to a rebellion no one saw coming. At Pelican Bay State Prison, men who had lived decades in solitary confinement refused their meals. They called it the hunger for humanity. Within 3 days, 30,000 inmates across 33 prisons joined them, the largest coordinated prison protest in U.S. history. Their demand wasn't luxury, it was recognition: end indefinite solitary confinement. Provide edible, safe food. Treat isolation as punishment, not existence. According to court filings in Ashker v. Governor of California, the strikers lost up to 30 pounds each. Some collapsed after 40 days. One letter, later published by the Los Angeles Times, read, "We are dying slowly anyway. At least now, the world will see it." Medical staff recorded heart rates dropping below 40 beats per minute. Prison officials denied abuse, claiming every meal met nutritional standard. But photos leaked through lawyers told another truth: gray slop, rancid bread, milk that curdled in the heat. After 59 days, California agreed to negotiate. 2 years later, it ended indefinite isolation, releasing thousands from the security housing unit. The men returned to solid food, thin soup and victory in equal measure. One survivor said, "They locked us up for silence. But hunger spoke louder than any riot." Guantanamo Bay. The force of feeding. 10 years later, the same language of hunger reached another ocean. At the U.S. detention facility in Guantanamo Bay, detainees held without trial refused food to protest endless confinement. According to the New York Times, more than 100 prisoners joined the 2013 strike. The Pentagon called it voluntary fasting. Doctors called it torture of the alimentary canal. Detainees were strapped into restraint chairs. Rubber tubes, slick with cooking oil, slid through their noses into their stomach. Nutritional shakes were poured in slowly to avoid vomiting, or too fast to make a point. One medical officer later told the Miami Herald, "You could smell vanilla Ensure in the air. That smell still makes me sick." The American Medical Association condemned the procedure as a violation of the Declaration of Tokyo. But the government argued it had a duty to preserve life. The feeding went on for months. The detainees never won their freedom, but they forced the world to look again, not at what they ate, but what they were being fed to forget. Northern Ireland, 1981. The fast that changed a nation. Decades before Pelican Bay, the act of refusal became legend. In Maze Prison, near Belfast, Irish Republican prisoners demanded to be recognized as political offenders, not criminals. When negotiations failed, Bobby Sands, age 27, stopped eating. He kept a diary until he could no longer lift the pen. "Our revenge will be the laughter of our children," he wrote on day 25. By day 66, he was dead. 9 others followed, one after another, each beginning his fast as the previous died. The British government refused to intervene. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher declared, "We are not prepared to consider special category status." The deaths ignited riots across Ireland and protests worldwide. Sands was elected to Parliament during his strike, a starving man becoming the voice of his cause. He died before he could take the seat, but the symbolism endured. The hunger strike fractured British policy and altered Irish politics forever. It showed that starvation could achieve what bullets could not: moral attention. Turkey, 2000 to 2007, the death fast. In late 2000, Turkey transformed its prison system, replacing communal dormitories with isolation-heavy F-type cells. Thousands of political inmates, from leftist groups to Kurdish activists, began a coordinated hunger strike. By December, 10,000 prisoners had joined. When the government launched Operation Return to Life to end it, 30 people were killed in simultaneous raids. Survivors continued fasting for years in rotation. They called it the death fast. Doctors documented devastating side effects: blindness, paralysis, and Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, a brain disorder caused by vitamin B1 deficiency. Between 2000 and 2007, more than 120 people died. Human Rights Watch reported that Turkish authorities ignored medical pleas and continued forced transfers to isolation. Yet, in time, reforms came, communal areas reopened, restrictions softened. The changes were quiet, the cost deafening. One survivor, interviewed by Der Spiegel, whispered through trembling lips, "We won nothing except proof that we could choose how to die." Russia, the silent colonies. In Russia's penal colonies, hunger strikes vanish before they're acknowledged. Inmates who refuse food are recorded as ill or non-compliant. Official data lists only a handful each year. Independent observers count thousands. Letters smuggled from IK-2 Pokrov and IK-6 Melikovo describe force feeding with thin soup and rubber tubing. According to Memorial and Novaya Gazeta, hunger is treated as rebellion against the state itself. A former inmate described the experience. They hold your head, pour broth through the tube, and say, "Eat for the motherland." Few hunger strikes in Russia reach the outside world. Those who attempt them risk beatings, transfer, or medical observation, a euphemism for punishment under sedation. Still, the strikes continue, whispered through bars and walls. Because even under censorship, a starving body can still tell the truth. Egypt and the Middle East. The politics of starvation in Egypt's Torah prison, hunger strikes have become a form of communication. With journalists silenced and lawyers denied access, inmates refuse food to signal abuse. Rights groups documented over 160 cases between 2019 and 2023. The government calls them disciplinary disturbances. Families call them the only proof their loved ones are still alive. In Israeli prisons, Palestinian detainees have long used hunger strikes to protest indefinite detention. According to Haaretz, at least 8 major collective strikes have taken place since 2012. Some lasted over 60 days. Israeli law permits force feeding if death is imminent, though medical associations refuse participation. The practice remains rare but deeply controversial, condemned by Amnesty International as the criminalization of protest through the body. In these conflicts, hunger is both faith and politics, the body turned into a banner. The science of starvation. Physiologically, the process is simple but brutal. Days 1 to 3. The body consumes glucose and glycogen. Days 4 to 10, fat stores burn, hunger pangs fade. Days 11 to 30, muscle tissue dissolves to feed vital organs. After 40 days, heart rhythm falters, blindness and delirium begin. Around 60 days, death. Medical studies in The Lancet and BMJ Global Health confirm that irreversible organ damage occurs long before consciousness fade. Yet many strikers report a strange serenity near the end, a psychological detachment that doctors can measure but never explain. Dr. Desmond Ross, who observed IRA prisoners in 1981, noted, "They find power in the weakness itself. It's the mind refusing to bow even as the body disappears." The ethics of feeding. Every hunger strike drags medicine into politics. Is a doctor's duty to preserve life or to respect autonomy? The World Medical Association's Declaration of Malta, 1991, Rev 2017 declares, "Forcible feeding of competent adults is never ethically acceptable." But governments often disagree. They argue that allowing a prisoner to die is negligence. The result: tubes, restraints, court orders, the medicalization of punishment. In the United Kingdom, courts have authorized feeding of inmates who refused nourishment for ideological reasons. In Israel, force feeding remains lawful. In the U.S., federal courts have permitted temporary orders for detainees in medical distress. Every ruling redefines the boundary between care and coercion, a line drawn in the throat of the unwilling. The psychology of control. Hunger strikes expose the secret fear of every warden, that control is never complete. The prison runs on predictability. When meals are served, lights go out, doors open. When inmates refuse to eat, the system loses rhythm. Guards begin to whisper. Supervisors count uneaten trays as failures. Politicians weigh public sympathy against authority. A single empty plate can make the entire institution tremble. Echoes of resistance. After Pelican Bay, reforms spread beyond California. Colorado, New York, and Washington reviewed solitary confinement policies. Activists cited Ashker v. Governor as precedent for humane treatment. After the May's hunger strikes, the world re-examined the politics of imprisonment. Ireland's Good Friday Agreement, 17 years later, carried the DNA of those deaths. Even Guantanamo changed. By 2016, most detainees had been released or transferred. The feeding chairs were stored away, symbols of a war that had starved its conscience. The survivors. Those who live through a hunger strike never truly recover. Years later, they eat slowly, distrustfully. Doctors call it refeeding syndrome, when food re-enters the body too fast, flooding it with electrolytes the starved organs can't handle. A small meal can kill. But the psychological scars cut deeper. Every forkful becomes a negotiation between memory and need. A Turkish survivor described her first bite of bread after release. I felt my stomach reject it. It remembered what my mind forgot. Some never regain full health, others never regain appetite. Yet all agree on one thing: they own themselves, if only for a moment. The meaning of refusal. Why do people starve themselves when no one listens? Because hunger is the last frontier of freedom. It cannot be beaten, bribed, or silenced. It's the ultimate statement that even in captivity, will remains sovereign. The state can measure every calorie, every heartbeat, every breath, but not resolve. The body, fragile and temporary, becomes the stage for a protest eternal. A former Pelican Bay striker said, "They can make me eat again. But they can't make me forget I once said no." Epilogue: the tray returns. When the hunger ends, it ends with a sound, the metallic scrape of a tray being pushed forward. Sometimes it's surrender. Sometimes it's survival. Always it's a choice. The guards collect the trays and breathe relief. The doctors close their charts. The world moves on. But the act remains, carved into the history of confinement like a scar no policy can erase. Because long after the meals resume, every prison still fears the same thing: the day hunger becomes louder than the locks. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real event. All factual information is drawn from verified public sources including court filings, medical journals, human rights investigations, and reputable international journalism.